Alrighty, so let's get into this drag rough mix up a little bit. Um, so far we've talked about the double stroke roll mix up and the paradiddle mix up. So this is kind of just blending those concepts together into isolating just one diddle at a time um, into some other sticking patterns. So the first two counts are ruffs. You might also hear these referred to as drags. There's no right or wrong terminology. To some people, there are, but we're a little more open minded. So, this, where you've got a flam basically with two grace notes instead of one, you can call it a drag or a ruff. I usually refer to them as ruffs, even though I did not was not taught that way in high school. So yeah, I'll call the isolated drags ruffs, and then basically anytime the ruff is within a bigger pattern, so not just an isolated ruff, but one within a pattern, then it is kind of referred to as a drag usually, or the rudiment has drag somewhere in the name. So the first two counts, you just got two ruffs. So let's do those. The old 80 beats a minute here. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 3. 1, 2. Ready, play. Alrighty. So one way that you can think about it in this context is a paradiddle without the second note. So paradiddle, paradiddle, instead of paradiddle. And a real ruff will not be written out in a rhythm like this, but in this case it would be like an eighth note and then two grace notes tied over to the next. So it would be a quarter note with two grace notes tied to the next quarter note. So, right? But for cleanliness sake and just kind of getting everyone on the same page, I've written them into precise rhythms to make sure that we're all aiming for the same thing. And then once you've worked those mechanics out, you can change into. So hopefully that makes a little more sense. So let's play those first two counts again, and if you need to think about it as a paradiddle without the second beat or something like that, then go ahead and do that. Ready, play. Ready, play. Alright, so now the next two counts are what's called a lesson 25. I think that comes from Strube, is the author of an old book in which this rudiment was addressed in the 25th lesson of the book, and I think that name just stuck. I'm pretty sure it's the Strube book. It might be some other, but anyway, it's an old military drumming manual. So that rudiment is actually called the lesson 25. It's a pretty weird name. So let's just play beat 3 and 4 of the first measure, that lesson 25. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, ready, play. 1, 2, ready, play. Okay? And for those 16th notes, just make sure that it's an actual double and that you're not singling it, but that it's two notes on one hand. And if you'll notice, the last eighth note of that measure has a dot above it. That is called a staccato marking. And in our terminology, that means that if you've got a tap height and an accent height, that the staccato height would be a quarter of the way up. So it would be somewhere around here. So in the double stroke roll mix up, we talked about how a tenuto mark is halfway between tap height and accent height. This one is just halfway between that and tap height. So it's a very small inflection, and the tendency is for people to overdo this inflection. So instead of, it turns into, so that is too much of an inflection in this case. So it's just a very small one. And a lot of modern writing doesn't have that inflection at all. It's just two heights. But I just wanted to add a little more level of detail into this that will bring it back to a little more of a traditional sounding rudiment. And that's a whole other thing that I could give a clinic about. But basically it's just built-in inflection and musicianship within each rudiment to give it a unique sound. So again, let's play those two counts and just try to get those three heights: the full accent, the tap, and then the slightly inflected tap. Ready, play. Sorry, just one. One, two, ready, play. All right, so now that hopefully we've got that, let's play the entire first measure. So, da 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 bum. 1, 3, 1, 2, ready, play. 1, 2, ready, play. 1, 2, ready, play. Okay, so hopefully you're noticing in the first two counts, kind of backing up a little bit here, that as I play the first count, I'm lifting my left hand to play on beat 2. So, and then in beat 2, I'm also lifting my right hand to then play beat 3. So if you haven't been doing that, try to add that in. And think about not only the rhythms that are being played in that hand, but the other hand that is not playing. Okay, so the next two counts are just a paradiddle. So I would like for you all to play that like a normal paradiddle where you lift after the second note. So it's a very long left hand lift to that next accent. Let's just do those two counts. One, two, ready, play. Okay, so hopefully you've got that. And now you've got the same 4 counts that you had starting on beat 3 of the first measure, but each one is off of the left hand instead of the right. So now you've got a left hand lesson 25 into a left hand paradiddle. And we're going to look at for the same things on that as we did the right hand. So let's play the next 4 counts together and see if we can get that. 5, 6, 7, 8. 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so now let us play from the beginning to there. Three, 5, 6, 7, 8. Alrighty. So, you've got your 2 ruffs, and then a lesson 25 paradiddle, lesson 25 paradiddle, and that's where we stopped. So, picking up where we left off, we've now got a lesson 25, but the sticking is what's different, and now that staccato note is not there. So these are called Berger lesson 25s. That's Berger. And you might recognize that from a previous video. But basically, Dr. Fritz Berger from Switzerland invented what's called the Berger notation. And it is a snare drum notation in which, instead of writing R's and L's below the music to indicate which hand you're going to play, he wrote the right hand notes on top of the line, and then the left hand notes he wrote below the line, so that you can visually see up and down which hand is going to play. So some people prefer the Berger notation. I kind of prefer the American Standard notation of the R's and L's underneath. But this version of the lesson 25 is kind of named after him. Berger lesson 25, Berger. So you've got a paradiddle with a diddle on the second note of the paradiddle. So, okay, and it looks like we've got 2 of those in a row. So let's do the next 4 counts together. So it's a paradiddle. So actually, let's do the skeleton. So don't play the diddle. Just play 2 paradiddles. Okay, so now do what we did with the double stroke roll, and go back, rewind that little bit, and see if you can add the double in and keep your same hand motions as what I'm doing, but you're just playing that double that's written. So now, hopefully you've done that, and let's play those 4 beats as they are written together. Alrighty, so hopefully you notice that immediately after that double is played, you come up for the upstroke. So 1, 2, and immediately after that second note of the double, you start making that lift. So now let's back up and take from the beginning to there. Alrighty, so that's generally what I'll refer to as the A section of this, even to the snares and tenors, where we just ended, everybody kind of ends that major phrase right there. So that's the A section of this exercise. So now you've got a drag paradiddle. Drag paradiddle number 1, I believe. So we've got, trying to figure out how to describe this. The first count is just kind of its own thing, and then a paradiddle. So paradiddle, paradiddle. Okay, so you got to tap Ruff into a paradiddle, and it's a drag paradiddle number 1. So let's try the next 4 counts. Da 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 paradiddle, da 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 paradiddle. But when we say paradiddle, make sure that you're not accenting the first note of that paradiddle like we typically do when we play paradiddles. It will be soft. So, okay, and then off the left. So you might just want to pause it and practice that by itself, just and then we'll do that. So let's play the next 4 counts. Drag paradiddle number 1. So I usually actually think about this as being a double paradiddle while doubling the second note of the double paradiddle. So quite a mouthful there. But if you take that diddle out and you just play one note there, then it's just a double paradiddle. And then adding it in. Okay. So you can see some of these rudiments are hybrid rudiments where you're mixing a ruff and you're mixing a double paradiddle and you're combining them and calling it a drag paradiddle. So there you go. So now let's play the next 6 counts. These are called double drags. And actually, I guess this one would be called a tap double drag because it starts with the tap. So tap, da da dum, da da dum, and then you got the double drag tap, or in this case, the tap double drag. So tap, drag, drag, tap, drag, drag. Okay. So let's play those 6 counts. Okay, so what I will point out there is in measure 6, on the and of 2, you've got that double. And then you're going to start lifting immediately after the second note of that double. So, right, and then the same vice versa here. Right, so lift as soon as you can on those figures. Let's play those 6 counts again and try to focus on that. Okay, so let's back up to where the B section would start at the end of the A section. This is beat 3 of the 4th measure is where we're going to start. So we've got drag paradiddles into tap double drags. So now the next rudiment is kind of combining the double drag tap into the drag paradiddle, and it is called a drag paradiddle number 2. So you've got the tap double drags into a paradiddle. So drag paradiddle, drag paradiddle. Okay, so that is your drag paradiddle number 2. I will say that it is very important in this exercise to keep your taps really low. It is not good to play Right. So you really want to get the taps down and make sure that your motions are very distinguished and that all of the low notes are just wrist turns and that you're not pumping the arms up and down or pumping the hands up and down while you're playing any of these taps. So you should lift the hand for the accents, and then all the other notes are played with the hand down and just turning the wrist. So let us play the drag paradiddle number 2s and really focus on that aspect of it, of only lifting the hand when you're going to play an accent. 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so again, the timing of the lift is the same as we've discussed in most previous paradiddle figures where the second note of the paradiddle is the upstroke. So we don't really need to talk too much about that. So where that just ended is the beginning of the C section. So let us play the entire B section where we've got drag paradiddles, tap double drags, which are usually called double drag taps, or just double drags, into drag paradiddle number 2s. Okay, so now let's try to back up and play A and B together. So go from the very beginning to where we just stopped. Sorry, this is really small print. Okay, let's try that again. 5, 6, 7, 8. Try that again. All right, so that's A and B together. Now, this is where it gets pretty interesting. We've got for the next 6 counts, no, for the next 3 counts, we've got, these are called tap drags. I believe they were originally called full drags, which I think is where we first saw the term drag used. So anyway, this is the full drag, but nobody calls it that anymore. So typically you will hear these called single drag taps or tap drags. In the most modern DCI, WGI circuits, they're just called tap drags. But I think the PAS, the Percussive Art Society International group, calls these single drag taps. So we're going to call these tap drags because they start with the tap before the drag within the tap drag. So the next 3 counts, it's basically a triple feel. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you double the second note of that triplet type feel. So, yeah, if you need to, just don't do it with a metronome and work it in triplets, or you can just start and read it as it's written on the page. Whichever is the fastest way in for you is fine. However, we're going to work it as it is on the page for the exercise. So let's play those 3 counts, the 2 tap drags. Okay, and again, we're going to try to do the upstroke as soon after you play that double as possible. So, lift, right. Alrighty. So now we've got some accented doubles. These are not in the PAS 40 rudiments. I call these stutters. I don't know if that's a somewhat official thing or where I picked that up from. I don't remember. But for our purposes, we'll just refer to them as stutters. And it's basically a tap drag type thing, but you accent the double instead of the tap before the double. So this goes. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so let's back up 3 counts and try to do the 2 tap drags into the 2 stutters. Okay, so for the stutters, I'm sure you're noticing that I'm getting 2 relatively even sounds for both of the notes within the double. If that's an issue for you, you don't have to try to get the same sound quality that I'm getting on those. I know enough of my technique to be able to make that happen, but if yours has a decay to it, like that's fine. The big thing is that you're accenting the first note of the doubles and that your hands are playing the correct sticking and all of that stuff. So it'd be great if you could figure out how to accent both of the notes within the stutter. But that's not the most important thing at this point, especially once you start speeding it up like the snares and tenors are playing these stutters. They're not necessarily focused on each individual note within the stutter. They're just trying to let the hands flow, and I'm not literally trying to. So it would be kind of silly to ask you all to do something slow that you're not going to do once you finally speed it up. So even though both notes are accented, don't worry so much about it. Just make sure you're accenting the first one and that you're playing the right sticking. Okay, so now we are at measure 11. So the first count of measure 11 stays as written. The change to measure 11 is I want you to take out the anda of 2. So the first 2 counts would just do this, 1 and a 2, right? So instead of 1 and a 2 and a 3, I want you to just play 1 and a 2, 3 with a flam on beat 3. Okay, so that first count is just the same as the very first count in the exercise. It's a tap into a ruff. Okay, and then when you add the downbeat of 3, that flam, I want you to really focus on keeping the left hand down and only lifting the right to play that flam. So notice when I play the right flam, you can barely see my left hand move. I'm really just dropping that note in from the position of attention, the playing position. It just goes down. There's no lift of it. So that first count goes 1 and a 2, 3. 1 and a 2, 3. So in each instance on that first beat, I'm playing with the right hand, I'm lifting with the left, and then in beat 2, I play with the left, lift my right, and then leave the left down for the flam. Okay, so there's a lot going on in there. You might want to just stop the video and play that extremely slowly. Like that slow, and just make sure that you're only getting like big accents and everything else is down. Now that you've done that, let's try to do that at 80 beats a minute together. So just those 2 beats into the beat 3. One, 3, 1, 2, ready, play. All right, so let's back up and look at the bottom line, first measure, beat 3. That is the start of the C section. So we're going from the beginning of C to beat 3 of bar 11. Okay. So, something I will point out that's really small on the page, you can barely see it, at the beginning of the C section, in those first 3 counts where you have the tap drags, there is an actual inflection mark after the double. So that is, in the tap drags, you would have, alright, so you can see that, that note right there just has a little point on it. Yeah, it's not as important that you get that staccato mark as it is in the top line where you've got the lesson 25s. That one is a little more important. This one, if you don't play the staccato and you only played 2 heights there, I wouldn't have a huge issue with that. I would prefer that to this, where you just really overplay the staccato. I'd rather you underplay it and just play it as a regular tap. So now let's look at measure 11, count 3. For the next 3 counts, these are called cheeses. They're actually cheesed flam accents. We'll get into the name of the flam rudiments in the flam mix-up, but again, the rudiments sometimes hybridize, and I figured that it would be more appropriate to put the cheeses and the flam drags, which is the last 3 counts, into the drag ruff mix-up, as they more appropriately fit into the drag family, in my opinion. So basically, you're just going to have to look at the music and play it really slowly and figure out the stickings. And once you go and play the flam mix-up exercise, it will make a little more sense to you, I think. But this is a flam accent. Flam accent, flam accent. So if I take the flams out, all I'm doing is playing that tripletized accent pattern. Right, and then you accent, you put a grace note before the accents. Okay, so those are flam accents. If you can, rewind the last few seconds and try to play some of that with me. And if you can't get it, pause it and try to work that out where you're just playing the accent pattern without the flams and then you add the flams in. When you do this, make sure that your taps are staying really low and that your accents are high and that you are lifting the hands for the accent. So you don't want to play it something like that. You want to lift the hands for the accents and keep everything else really low. So hopefully now you've worked out your flam accents. And for this first 3 counts of the last little bit here, we're taking the flam accent and we're putting a double on the accent of the flam, which is called the primary stroke. So you got the grace note and the primary stroke. Okay, so we're doubling the primary stroke. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, so some of the biggest issues that I see with players attempting this figure is that they raise the grace notes and they try to, and that's just not going to work when you try to play this faster. It might work at that tempo, might work great for you, but if you start raising your grace notes on these and these flam drags now, then that's really going to hinder you later when you try to actually speed this up. So please learn this correctly with the appropriate motions, and I promise that the amount of time that you put in right now making sure that it's correct is going to save you a lot of time later. All right, so now the last 3 counts of the exercise is just the flam accent, but you double the second note of the flam accent instead of the first. So let's do that. So yeah, remember there is a pause feature. If you need to at any point, pause it, work some stuff out, and then start the video back. Now we're just going to start backing up and adding. So let's play the last 6 counts of the exercise together. So you've got the cheese flam accents into the flam drags. Okay, now back up 2 counts. So we're playing the last 2 measures of the exercise. Okay, so if you're confused, remember that in measure 11, we took out the anda of 2. So it's just 1 and a 2, 3. Okay, so if you haven't already, you might want to take a pen or a pencil and just put an X through those notes. If you're watching this in future years, then hopefully I have edited the file and you no longer even see those notes and you're going, why does he keep talking about this? There aren't any notes there. So there we go. Now let's back up and play the entire C section. Alrighty, so now let's play B and C together. Okay, and if you'll notice at the C section, when I play that first accent, I'm rebounding it to the level that that staccato would be, so that quarter accent height. Right, so if you're savvy on everything that we're doing, and you haven't yet attempted that, then try to do that where you're playing and then you rebound to a slightly higher and you just freeze it right there in position to play that staccato. Cool. So now let's play B and C together again. Okay, now let's play A and B together just to review. Sorry, that was just A. A and B. 2, ready, play. And we went to the end anyway. Apologize for my focus there. I've actually never played this all the way through, so I'm learning as I'm doing it. All these other mix-ups I've kind of taught to bass lines for the last few years, but I've never actually taught this one to a bass line. So, yeah, it was fun. So I'm gonna stop the recording and start it to give you guys some playing examples.